Hi golfers, Nick here for Nick Taylor Golf. It's Friday, so welcome to another lesson on golf tips. This week on Golf Tips, we're going to talk about the stack and tilt golf swing from the face-on viewpoint. We're talking about a mid-iron shot. We're going to go through the 9 different positions that you need to look for in your golf swing. We're going to break it down into 3 different parts. We're going to talk about the backswing, the downswing, and then the finish to help you golfers out there play better golf. Before we take a look at the 9 different positions and break the swing down into 3 parts here, just take a look at the shot here. So I've hit this shot from on the course recently, and you can see there the contact clearly hitting ball then turf, and that's really one of the most important things in the golf swing, is to control where the club hits the ground, control the low point of the golf swing, hit the ball first, then the turf. It's what separates the best golfers in the world. So now we're going to take a look at my swing in detail. First up, we're going to talk about the 9 different positions. So if we take a look at the setup position here, we call this position 1. So we have a system, we break it down into 9 different parts. Now for this video, we're just going to reference the left shoulder and also the right leg. So we're going to draw a line on the right leg or a circle there on the right shoulder. And as we go through the different parts of the swing here, I'm going to make note of the different positions. So position 1's at setup here. You can see my hands are forward, my body weight is slightly favouring the left side. Now as I take the club back here, as we get to where the shaft is parallel, we call this position 2. So I'm just going to draw a white line there on the shaft as a reference point, and you can start to see how my left shoulder here has started to move downwards at this point. So as I've taken the club back, my left shoulder is starting to move down. You can see that I'm turning as well. As we take the club up to left arm parallel, we call this position 3. So I'm just going to make a note here from the arm and the shaft here. So there's around 100 degrees of angle between my left arm and the shaft at position 3. And again, you can see how my left shoulder started to continually move down. I've started to rotate as well. Now as we get to the top of the golf swing, this is where I've turned the most in the golf swing. You can see how my head has stayed quite centered, my hips have sort of turned inside that line, and you can see my left shoulder has moved downwards. So they're the key moves for the backswing. So now we're going to explain those in the bay here, just to help you guys out there get some ideas of how to move the club in the backswing to stay centered with the head position, hinge the wrists in the correct way as we go back, and turn the hips, making sure they don't sway through that line. I think that's one of the key things here, is trying to keep that weight forward as you go back rather than sway through that line. It's what the best players in the world do. One of the best things about the system for me is the predictability of the shot. With this ball position on the grid, I know my swing path's going to be around 4 degrees into out, my attack angle is going to be around 4 degrees downwards, and the ball will draw. So you can see the shot on the screen there, tight little draw, just to the left of the line, pitched around 160 with a 7-iron there. And then you can see the data there on the screen, 4.5 degrees inside out and 5 degrees downwards, pretty much as I predicted. The speed there was actually up to 94.9 miles an hour, so pretty fast, pretty predictable shot for me. So I know using the system here that I'm going to get that predictable ball flight. Now we're going to talk about the backswing position and go through the 9 P positions, but first of all, in the backswing here, before we take the club back, we call this position 1. So you can see how my feet are turned down, my knees are turned down, my hands are forward. I feel like there's about 55 to 60% of my weight on the left side. So we call this position 1. As I move into the takeaway here, the first movement I feel is my left knee and my left shoulder kind of moving downwards. I feel my left knee flexing, and I feel my left shoulder moving down as I start to take the club back. This gives me the ascent to the hands, and you can see as I get to position 2 here, small gap from my right leg to the shaft. We saw that on the video I played just a second ago. That's position 2 with the shaft parallel. As I continue moving to position 3, I'm turning, continue to move my left shoulder down, and then there's about 100 degrees angle between my left arm and the shaft. So position 1 at setup, weight left, hands forward, feet turned out, left shoulder moves down, left knee starts to flex, right leg starts to straighten as I turn. Position 2, position 3, and as I get to the top here, I'm kind of staying very centered. My right leg has started to straighten towards the top of my backswing, and actually by the time I get to the top, you can't see it from the front view, but my knee is actually starting to regain some flexion. So we'll take a look at that in another video from the side view. So key checkpoints here. shoulder down, starting to set the club with my wrists as I get to the top. I'm also feel like my spine's extending as I go back. I see a lot of golfers kind of staying flexed in their backswing, and this restricts how much this left arm can move, and it tends to cause the arm to bend as well. If you can start to extend the spine, move the shoulder down, to make it much easier to turn and keep those arms straight as you go into the backswing. So position 1, set up, 2, shaft parallel, left arm parallels position 3, and then top of the backswing, position 4. So that's the backswing checkpoints in the stack and tilt system. So now we're going to take a look at the movements in the downswing moving into impact here. So this is position 4 at the top of the backswing. So as we start down, you'll start to see how my hips start to move forward, and by the time I get down to left arm parallel, we call this position 5. So I'm just going to reference this angle here. So 77. So you can see here it was 100 degrees on the backswing and 77 on the downswing. A couple of things to note here would be that my hips have moved forward. Notice that my hands here are now on a more narrow arc coming downwards, and I have a smaller angle between my left arm and the shaft. So my hands have moved closer to my body or more towards the target, and I've increased the bend backwards in my wrist as I've started down. I've also started to turn but move my lower body weight towards the target. So as we move down, this is position 5, we're going to move into position 6 here. So this is where the shaft is parallel to the ground. So I'm just going to make a note on the shaft here. So you can see that blue line there in reference to the white line in the backswing. So we have position 2 where the shaft was parallel going back. Now in the downswing the shaft's parallel, we call this position 6. So at this point here, there's going to be more bend to my right wrist. As I start down, my shoulders are almost back to square to the target. My hips have started to open up to the target at this point, and also my lower body weight has moved to the left. So very big difference here from 2 to 6. So we're just going to show you 2 again. So 2 is here on the backswing. So I was more turned on the backswing, and then at position 6, I've started to almost get my shoulders back to square. My hands are now closer to the target at this particular point. So that's position 6. Now, as we move into impact here, this is position 7. So quite different here compared to where I started at setup. First of all, note that my hips have moved about 4 inches forward. Notice my left shoulder has moved forward and upwards, and that's key. As I'm hitting the golf ball here, you can see my legs are extending as I go through. So my right leg's pretty straight at this point. You can see my heels coming off the ground. So I'm basically making space here for the club as it comes into impact. Now, we're going to talk about the hands as we move through into the finish, but just really now we're going to talk about the downswing movement. So from position 4, 5, 6 where the shaft's parallel, and then 7 at impact. So we've arrived at the top here, and we saw in the video just a second ago how my hips started to move to the left. I started to turn, and also there was more angle at position 5 between my shaft and the left arm here. So I had about 70 degrees, whereas about 100 and wider going back. So my hands were on a wider trajectory going back. Now they're narrow as I start to move my weight forward. This is a key move, guys. If you can get the feeling of bending that wrist back, moving the hips forward as you turn, that's going to help you bring that club down on a narrow arc or trajectory to hit the ground in front of the ball. Remember, the setup and impact position is very different. So we're going to talk now what the differences are, but we have to do something different to be able to get into a position where we can hit the ground in front of the golf ball. Obviously the club starts behind the ball, so we need to be able to hit ball first, then turf. So the impact has to be different. So top of the backswing, starting to turn, move my weight to the left, bend the wrist back. Now as I get to position 6, as I mentioned earlier, this is the point where the shaft is parallel, and I've got the most bend in my right wrist. So we saw the takeaway, my hands are wider, and as I come down, they're on a narrower arc. And by the time I get into impact, my legs are starting to extend, hands are slightly forward, and the left shoulder's more forward and upwards as I hit through, because I'm starting to extend as I go through the ball. We're going to talk shortly about what happens with the hands and the club as I hit through impact. But the key things here from the top is to feel like the club comes down on a narrower arc as you push your hips forward, and you keep the wrist bent back so you don't release that club and hit behind the golf ball. Now we're going to talk about the follow through position. Now at impact there, I've just put that blue line on the shaft. Now we're going to talk about the movements as we move through the golf ball here. So 7 was impact. 8 is where the right arm is parallel to the ground. So we've gone through 8 of the positions so far. I'm just going to take it back to 6 here, because it's going to talk about something that's quite important for you guys to note. So I'm just going to put a circle here on the butt of the club and where it is at impact. And then as we go through into the follow through, you'll notice these yellow circles are raising up. And this is quite important here. Those yellow circles there continually rise from 6, 7 to 8. So as I go through there, the butt of the club is rising. The lowest point where the butt of the club is at 6, and then it rises through. And this is what the best players do. And they do this by extending their legs up through the ground and moving their left shoulder up. You can see now where my left shoulder has moved to. Okay, so you saw where it was at impact, and then where it is as I get through to 8. So my left shoulder continues to rise up, my lower body started to move up. My belt buckle here is higher than it was at setup. And you can see how my legs are extending up as well. And this is a key move to shallow the attack angles you hit through. We want to hit the ground, but we don't want to be taking too much of a big divot here. You can see the divot I took there was reasonably shallow for an 8 iron. And then as I continue through into the finish, you can see how I've extended my body. And what I mean by that is if I took a line up from my belt, you can see how my belt there is the furthest thing forward in my golf swing. I've extended my legs more. I've moved my hips about 6 or 7 inches forward. And you can see how my head is quite stable and where my left shoulders continuously move round here. So in the backswing, the left shoulder moved downwards, and then in the downswing it moves up through impact and then back around in the finish. So my left shoulder is moving in a circle. We can see how my weight doesn't sway back at all. It's always moving towards the target. And you can see how the butt of the club raises through impact. So now we're going to talk about those movements there from 7 at impact to 8 and then 9 in the finish. Made contact with the ball. Now I mentioned on the video just a second ago how at this point here, position 6, the butt of the club is at its lowest, and then as it starts to come into impact, it starts to raise as I extend my legs and move my left shoulder up and around as I go through. And this is an important part to shallow the golf club. I see a lot of golfers that swing out to in, take big divots, hit down on the ball too much. As they come down, they don't bring that club out of the ground. They almost stay down on the golf ball for too long. You have to find a way to shallow the club out, so you take a shallow divot. You've got to get the ground in front of the ball, but not such a big divot. And so to do that, you have to, as you come through, extend the legs, push it up, bend backwards with the body here. So we've got the key moves here would be to extend the legs, push the hips forward, bend the shoulders back. By this point, my head's not really moved till past this point where the right arm's parallel. My belt is pushed up and forward. My legs are extending up. And then by the time I finish the swing, I've continually turned and pushed my hips forward. So my belt would be the furthest thing forward. That's one of the biggest faults I see in the finish, where golfers stay bent forward and the upper body is in front of their hips, and you'll tend to lose balance that way. If you take a look at the best players in the world, you see how they're very balanced in the finish, and that's because their belt is pushed forward of their upper body, so they're extending backwards as they finish the golf swing. It's also a power source, right? In the backswing we extend, then we bend down to P6, and then we extend upwards through the golf ball, P8, and then P9 in the finish. So my hips, as you saw in the video there, guys, I'm going to play the video out now in slow motion so you can see these movements, but head's very stable as I go back, come down on a narrower arc, hips pushing forward. My hips are always moving towards the target, and then I extend upwards and forwards into the finish. So they're the 9 key positions, guys, that you have to try and hit or get close to be able to perform a repeatable golf swing using the stack and tilt golf swing. And fun enough, when you take a look at the tour players, a lot of them hit these positions. So when we're teaching you this golf swing, we're also teaching you what the best players in the world do. So hopefully that video helps, guys. Hope you enjoy the video. Please give it a thumbs up. If you've got comments on that, post them in the box below. And I'll see you again next week for another video.
The most